Gene Kelly's blood dripped onto his mother's kitchen linoleum as his father's fist connected with his nose for the second time. The 19-year-old staggered backward, tasting copper and shame in equal measure, while James Patrick Kelly stood over him with the rage of a man whose son had just shattered every expectation he had ever held. Dancing. The word exploded from the elder Kelly's mouth like profanity. My son. Prancing around like some kind of... He couldn't finish the sentence. His Irish Catholic sensibilities too offended to give voice to his worst fears. It was 11:47 p.m. on March 8, 1931. In the Kelly family kitchen in Pittsburgh, the Great Depression was strangling America. Real men were fighting for jobs that paid enough to feed their families, and James Kelly had just discovered his eldest son was wasting his time with something no respectable man should ever be caught doing. But what happened in the next 23 minutes would either destroy Gene Kelly's dreams forever, or forge him into the revolutionary artist who would redefine American entertainment. The confrontation that nearly ended Gene Kelly's career before it began started with a lie about overtime shifts and a dance shoe forgotten under a kitchen chair. For 8 months, Gene had been living a double life that would have made any spy proud. By day, he was the dutiful eldest son of a working-class Irish family, helping his father with his sales route, contributing to the household income, playing the role of the responsible young man his Depression-era community expected him to be. But 3 nights a week, when the Kelly household settled into sleep, Gene would slip out through the back door and make his way to the Verona Eagles Club, where he taught dance lessons to earn money. He couldn't admit he was making. It wasn't just about the income. Though the 50 cents per lesson meant the difference between his family having meat for dinner or making do with potatoes again, it was about something deeper. Something Gene couldn't articulate even to himself. The way movement made him feel alive in a way that nothing else could touch. The problem was that in Pittsburgh in 1931, dancing wasn't considered a legitimate pursuit for someone with Kelly written on his birth certificate. Real men worked with their hands, built things, earned honest wages through sweat and muscle. Dancing was for women, for people who didn't understand the value of hard work, for individuals whose masculinity was questionable at best. James Kelly had raised his son to understand these distinctions. He had immigrated from Ireland with nothing but determination and a willingness to outwork anyone who stood in his way. He had built a life for his family through sheer force of will, and he expected his sons to follow the same path of respectable, conventional success. What he couldn't know was that Gene Kelly was about to become one of the most revolutionary artists of the 20th century, and that the passion his father saw as shameful would eventually make the Kelly name famous around the world. But first, they had to survive the night when James Kelly's expectations collided with his son's secret life. The discovery happened by accident, which somehow made it more devastating than if Gene had been caught red-handed. James had been working late in his sales ledgers when he decided to get a glass of milk from the kitchen. That is when he spotted something that didn't belong. A soft-soled dance shoe, worn and scuffed, tucked under Gene's chair at the kitchen table. For several minutes, James stared at the shoe as if it were evidence of some crime he couldn't quite comprehend. Then the pieces began falling into place. Gene's mysterious late-night absences, the extra money he had been contributing to the household, the way he had been humming melodies. James didn't recognize. When Gene slipped back into the house at 11:30 p.m., exhausted from 3 hours of teaching foxtrot and waltz to couples who couldn't afford professional lessons, his father was waiting for him in the darkened kitchen. James's voice cut through the silence like a blade. Gene froze in the doorway, still wearing his good pants and the shirt he saved for special occasions. He could see his father's silhouette in the dim light, could feel the weight of judgment filling the space between them. "Dad? What are you doing up so late?" Instead of answering, James reached down and picked up the dance shoe, holding it out like evidence of betrayal. "You want to explain this to me?" "Son," Gene's stomach dropped. In 8 months of carefully maintained deception, he had never made a mistake this careless. The shoe was supposed to be hidden in his room, safely tucked away from family scrutiny. "It is... I can explain. I am sure you can." James's voice was deadly quiet. Start with why my son owns a piece of equipment that belongs in a woman's wardrobe. The insult hit Gene like a physical blow, but it also ignited something he hadn't expected. Anger. Not shame. Not embarrassment. But pure, righteous fury at the implication that his passion was somehow less worthy than his father's approved pursuits. It is a dance shoe. Dad, I teach dancing at the Eagles Club 3 nights a week. The words hung in the air like a confession of murder. James Kelly stared at his son for several seconds, processing information that seemed to contradict everything he thought he knew about the boy he had raised. You teach what? Dancing. I teach people to dance, and they pay me for it. Dancing. James repeated the word as if trying to understand a foreign language. My son teaches dancing. Yes, sir. That is when James Kelly's control snapped entirely. What kind of man teaches other people to prance around like trained monkeys? The elder Kelly's voice rose with each word. What kind of son have I raised that thinks wiggling around to music is a way to make a living? Gene felt something crack inside his chest. Not just hurt, but a fundamental break between the person his father wanted him to be and the person he was discovering himself to be. The kind of son who is good at something that makes people happy. Gene said, his voice steady despite the tremor running through his entire body. Happy? James laughed bitterly. You think happiness puts food on the table? You think happiness pays the rent? This family is struggling to survive, and you are out playing games instead of learning skills that might actually help us. I am helping. I have brought home more money from dance lessons than I ever made working your route. It was the wrong thing to say. James Kelly's face darkened with something that went beyond disappointment into territory that Gene had never seen before. Money you have made by embarrassing our family name. Money you have made by doing something no respectable man would be caught dead doing. The accusation hung between them like a challenge. Gene realized that this wasn't just about career choices or family expectations. This was about his father's fundamental understanding of masculinity, of respectability, of what it meant to be a Kelly. Dad, you have never even seen me dance. How do you know? I don't need to see it. James exploded. I know what dancing is, and I know what kind of men do it for money. The implication in his father's voice was clear, and it cut Gene deeper than any physical blow could have managed. Are you questioning my character, Dad? Because if you are, I am questioning your judgment. I am questioning how I raised a son who thinks prancing around like a fool is more important than building a real career. That is when Gene Kelly made the decision that would define the rest of his life. Then maybe you didn't raise me right, he said quietly. The words seemed to echo in the small kitchen like gunshots. James Kelly's face went white, then red, then something beyond anger that Gene had never witnessed in another human being. What did you say to me? Gene straightened his shoulders and looked his father directly in the eye. I said maybe you didn't raise me right. Because if being raised right means giving up something I love, something I am good at, something that makes me feel like I am actually alive, then maybe I don't want to be the man you are trying to turn me into. James Kelly's first punch caught Gene completely off guard, splitting his lip and sending him stumbling backward into the kitchen table. You ungrateful little bastard, his father growled, advancing with the methodical purpose of someone who had decided that words were no longer sufficient. Gene wiped blood from his mouth and stared at the man who had just crossed a line neither of them would ever be able to uncross. Hit me again if it makes you feel better, Dad, but it won't change the fact that I am going to keep dancing. The second punch caught him in the nose, and that is when Gene's mother, Harriet, appeared in the kitchen doorway in her nightgown, drawn by sounds that shouldn't have been coming from her home. James, what in God's name are you doing? Both men froze, suddenly aware that their private war had escalated beyond anything that could be contained within the normal boundaries of family disagreement. Your son, James said through gritted teeth, has decided that dancing is more important than family respectability. Harriet looked back and forth between her bleeding son and her enraged husband, trying to process a scene that seemed to belong in someone else's kitchen. Gene, is this true? Gene wiped blood from his nose with the back of his hand and made a decision that would echo through the rest of his life. "Mom, I teach dance lessons 3 nights a week. I am good at it. People pay me for it. And it is the only thing I have ever done that feels like it means something." Harriet Kelly stared at her eldest son, seeing him clearly for perhaps the first time. Not as the dutiful boy who helped with household chores and contributed to family income, but as a young man with his own dreams, his own talents, his own vision of what his life could become. "James," she said quietly. "He is 19 years old. He is my son, and he will live according to the values of this family, as long as he is under my roof." Gene looked at his father, then at his mother, then at the dance shoe that had started the entire confrontation. In that moment, he understood that he was standing at a crossroads that would determine not just his immediate future, but the entire trajectory of his life. "Then maybe," Gene said slowly, "I shouldn't be under your roof anymore." The silence that followed was so complete that Gene could hear the kitchen clock ticking, could hear his mother's sharp intake of breath, could hear his father's labored breathing as the implications of his statement sank in. "Jen, no," his mother whispered. But James Kelly's response was swift and final. "If that is your choice, then you had better make it tonight." Gene looked around the kitchen that had been the center of his family's life for as long as he could remember. He thought about his younger brothers sleeping upstairs, about the sacrifices his parents had made to keep the family together during the worst economic crisis in American history, about the security he was about to abandon in pursuit of something his father saw as worthless. Then he thought about the way he felt when he moved to music, about the couples who came to him for lessons with hope in their eyes, about the possibility that somewhere beyond Pittsburgh, there might be people who understood that dancing was about more than just movement. It was about joy, expression, the fundamental human need to transform feeling into motion. "All right, Dad, I will be gone by morning." Gene walked upstairs, packed his few possessions into a single suitcase, and left his family home before dawn on March 9th, 1931. He wouldn't speak to his father again for 3 years. The next morning, Gene Kelly rented a room in a boarding house on the other side of Pittsburgh and began building the life that would eventually take him to New York, then to Hollywood, then to a level of fame and artistic achievement that would vindicate every sacrifice he made in pursuit of his dreams. But the cost of that night in the kitchen stayed with him forever. The relationship with his father never fully healed, even after James Kelly eventually came to understand that his son's shameful passion had made the Kelly name famous around the world. Years later, when Gene Kelly was an established star, reporters would ask him about his early influences, about the people who had supported his artistic development. Kelly would always speak warmly about his mother's encouragement, about teachers who had nurtured his talent, about the community of dancers and choreographers who had helped him grow. He rarely mentioned his father's role in shaping his career, except to say that sometimes the most important support comes from learning to believe in yourself. When the people you love most don't believe in your dreams. The dance shoe that started the confrontation remained in Gene Kelly's possession for the rest of his life, a reminder of the night he chose his own path over his father's approval, his own vision over family expectations, his own definition of masculinity over the limitations others tried to impose on him. In interviews near the end of his life, Kelly would sometimes reflect on that night in the kitchen and wonder what might have happened if he had chosen differently, if he had abandoned dancing, found a respectable job, lived the life his father had mapped out for him. "I might have been a perfectly adequate salesman," he would say with a slight smile, "but the world would have been a little less bright, a little less joyful, and I think that would have been the real tragedy." The fight that nearly ended Gene Kelly's career before it began instead became the catalyst that launched him toward greatness. The father who saw his son's passion as shameful lived long enough to watch that same passion bring joy to millions of people around the world. And the young man who chose his dreams over his family's expectations discovered that sometimes the most courageous thing you can do is disappoint the people you love in service of becoming the person you are meant to be. The blood on the kitchen floor dried and was mopped away the next morning. But the courage it took for Gene Kelly to stand up for his right to dance, to express himself, to define his own version of what it meant to be a man, that courage became the foundation of everything he would accomplish in the years that followed. In the end, The night Gene Kelly's father discovered his son was dancing became the night Gene Kelly discovered he had the strength to choose his art over everything else. And perhaps that was the most beautiful dance of all. The one that moved him away from the life others expected him to live, and toward the life he was brave enough to create for himself.